Another challenge was this, from a statistical point of view. In 2009, one of the things I did in order to kill hyperinflation was to adopt multiple currencies. The adoption of multiple currencies simply meant the liquidation of the Zimbabwean dollar as legal tender in Zimbabwe, because the Zimbabwean dollar had become an instrument of arbitrage. We had about 4 exchange rates. An official exchange rate, which was like 1 to 15, a UN exchange rate, 1 to 35 quad, a black market exchange rate, and what we called an RTGS exchange rate. I was telling John over lunch that at some stage, the cost of diapers, I had a baby boy there, the cost of diapers was $300 US. That's Zimbabwe for you in 2008. So when we adopted multiple currencies, it meant that all assets had to be redenominated, and all assets that were denominated in Zimbabwean dollar values were wiped out. That means bank balances in banks, that means the assets at the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, and so forth. So we had to start from fresh. Pensioners lost billions and billions of US dollars, and up to now we have not recovered. And part of the problem as well was, how do you evaluate an asset? Take a building like this one. Prior to 2008, you knew its value. It's $5 quadrillion. In the US era, how do you value it? So we had experts, people like Professor Henk from Cato Institute, trying to use the purchasing power parity theory and all kinds of fancy things. But up to now, we have never had a correct answer. So the long and short of what I'm trying to say is that it's so important for African policymakers to have quality data. My suspicion is that part of our backwardness is that, number one, we don't have decent data, and even where we have had a semblance of decent data, we have not been able to interpret it. And more importantly, because we're a continent that is so dominated by politics, you have had a situation where politicians have actually tampered with the data. So to give an example of Zimbabwe, for a long time, between 2005 and 2006, the Zimbabwean government did not want to admit that month-on-month inflation was now 80%, and that our inflation was now around 300%. So you were continuously being told our inflation is 40%, our inflation is 50%. But we ordinary citizens were living hyperinflation already. You would see a queue in Zimbabwe, join that queue and ask later, why are we queuing? We are queuing for the price of bread. By the time you got to the price of the queue, by the time you got to the counter, to the till operator, the price of bread has gone up 3 times. Workers, for instance, they would leave home with $1,000 billion, $500 billion going one way, $500 billion going back home. By the time you have to board the taxi back home, your $500 billion is no longer enough, so you have to sleep in a pavement. So again, the corruption of data is very common on the African continent. So the way I see it is that the effort by GGA is so key, because if you look at the data that you find, if you are a Minister of Finance, your starting point is data produced by the World Bank, in particular the World Development Indicators. The IMF has also started producing what they call world outlooks. The African Development Bank under Donald Kaberuka is also producing decent data. So that's your starting point. So you actually have a mistrust towards your own central statistical agents. The funding of these central statistical agents is also very questionable. Where in a country which is fragile like Zimbabwe, where you've got competing demands, you've got a mere budget of $1 billion against demands that exceed $40 billion, the CSO becomes bottom of the pile. So you find that the majority of CSOs, Central Statistical Agents on the African continent, are actually funded by donors. But the challenge of donor funding is that sometimes donors actually want project financing. They will actually want you to do the research that they want you to do. And the most common features where donors want to put money is number one, labor market studies, and then maternal mortality rates, in other words, health surveys. So important statistical data on actual output, on investment, it doesn't have takers. And yet when you are sitting at the Ministry of Finance, that is in fact what you are looking at. Take for instance the national census. Zimbabwe had a national census in 2012. We had a problem convincing the rest of government the importance of having a census. Then the second problem was that of actually persuading government that, look, donors are putting X amount of money. Surely we also need to put money on the table. The census is also so important. But I know of certain countries that have never done a census for over 40 years. Fortunately, we managed to do that. So the funding of Central Statistical Offices is very key.